And I think I just set mine down over there. Yeah. You're like, oh, she just got you coffee.
Absolutely. All right.
I know. So interesting. I'm glad that you're late in the semester.
Was my
But just been a lot to go catch them up on. You haven't prepared or anything.
but you can take the bus. You can take the bus. I think he took the bus with me one time just to show that I could do it, right? And then let's demystify it.
Okay, sorry. I would love for you guys to visit, but we are going to be, we're probably live right now, so. Hi, Charlie. Thanks for coming. My sponsor.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Liesl Clark, and welcome to the last of our speaker series presentations for the winter semester here. It feels a little wintry today, I can say. So we're thrilled to have Hilary Doe. And before we share a little bit more about her, who will be, of course, our speaker for the next little bit. Hi, Greg. Thanks for coming. I do want to start off, well, actually, I say thanks to Greg, thanks to everybody who's here in the room, really appreciate it. And thanks to those of you who are catching us online, either now or asynchronously. So happy to do it. And we're really thrilled. We've had, I was just mentioning Hilary, we've had really a great series of presenters this semester. Those of you who participated will be receiving a survey. I'm interested in if you would, for fall semester, if folks are interested in this continuing, first of all. But second of all, we've been very public sector focused, both in the fall and then in the winter semester this year. I'm curious if people would prefer us to also include some folks in the private sector or NGO community around what's happening in climate sustainability. So look for that in your email boxes, hopefully before graduation. We'll see if I manage to get it out. I guess I should, just to make sure I get James's opinion, because otherwise he'll be a lame duck. So. All right, great. Well, again, thanks for being here. So I am thrilled to have our final speaker, Hilary Doe, join us. Hilary really needs no introduction to many of us. She's doing just incredible work on the population growth effort here in Michigan. And she's been in this role for just about 2 years now, if I remember correctly. Yeah, that's pretty exciting. So I'm not going to steal her thunder, though. So I'd love to start, Hilary, if you would tell us a little bit about your career path and a little bit about your education background.
Hi, everybody. My background is varied. So I'll take you on the journey, I guess, a little bit. But, so I went here actually to the University of Michigan for undergrad, and for grad school, you can me. So I got my master's at the board school and ended up spending the first half of my career after a short stint in doing some consulting in the think tank world. So I was the national director for a good chunk of time with the Roosevelt Institute, if folks are familiar with Roosevelt. And we did mostly economic policy work. That was kind of the role I was in. For what it's worth, though, the aspect of that work that was most compelling to me and that I was most proud of wasn't just the traditional kind of fellows in a think tank, but actually that the Roosevelt Institute's unique since it had chapters across the country, about 100 chapters, many of which were at campuses across the US and community colleges and some city chapters, where mostly young people did work with the local community to identify local policy challenges that they could tackle, write policy solutions, and then implement them. So they implemented promise programs and environmental solutions, all kinds of other things. And I always really appreciated that because it proved, I think, to so many folks that we were actually able to source what the biggest problems across the country were, from the bottom up. It was a beautiful kind of, petri dish for solutions. When something would work in one place, you could scale it to a bunch of other places. And then our fellows, who are traditional fellows, would get inspired by what was happening on the ground and be able to implement those things more nationally. So I loved that version of what we were doing, the opposite of an ivory tower thing. It's relevant, I think, to the rest of my career, because after that, I went to Princeton briefly, but it's not U of M, so who cares? Let's not talk about it. And very a proud PhD dropout. I did my coursework there and then got recruited out of there to go to a tech company, which felt like a real pivot at the time, having been in policy work forever. But it was compelling to me because they were building tech to support nonprofit organizations and advocacy organizations to accomplish these, big missions or, tackle big challenges. And it felt actually really similar to the think tank work I've been doing in a lot of ways. Because in the same way that those think tanks were getting tons of people, thousands and thousands across the country, to come together to accomplish, hard things, that we were doing that from a tech perspective. Like, how could we leverage technology to help folks who were trying to build movements and to raise money and, tackle big problems, facilitate that and, support democracy and support, tackling challenges in our local community. And I ended up being president of that company. I was there about 10 years at the end of the day, before I ultimately got the chance to move my family back to Michigan. I guess the part I missed in all of this is I was a walking Michigan commercial. For that whole time, I was out of the state and trying to get home, and we moved back to Detroit in 2018. I was still president of that company and started a think tank here called Scout, doing some local work, and then heard from the governor's office saying, "Hey, you like impossible challenges, want to try this one?" And so took on this role as chief growth officer, and it's honestly a bit cheesy, I suppose, but the honor of my professional career so far, to get the chance to serve a state that I care so much about, and to do exactly what I've been doing in those other contexts in the private sector and in the nonprofit sector, but now in the public sector, which we're really trying to bring folks together across the whole state, Michiganders in the thousands, to let us know what they love about their place, what's between them and building their future here, and tackle some of our biggest challenges, tell our story, and really grow our state.
So obviously we're in the School for Environment Sustainability. We talk a lot about climate sustainability connections. There's a lot of those threads in your career. Can you talk a bit about where you had kind of pivot points or decision points that you leaned into the climate work or the clean energy work?
Yeah, to your point, there were elements of that throughout my whole career. We did all kinds of different elements of environmental work in the think tank space, and again, also with environmental organizations in the tech context. But honestly, I think the thing right now, the work that I'm doing now is maybe the most focused on climate and energy work, because Michigan, I'd say, is so strategically positioned in those areas. And because when we talk about growth, I think sometimes folks think that's antithetical to climate work or clean energy work or the in fact, when I started this effort, some of the questions I got initially was, if you're pro growth, are you sort of anti conservation? Are those things like fundamentally at odds? And from the beginning of this work, from our first conversation, when we asked folks what they love about our place and what they hate about Michigan, of course the first thing is, well, if 3,000 miles of coastline and 20% of, most fresh water, so from the beginning, us being a growth note, ensuring that we're protecting our natural resources as a basis and a foundation for growth. This is the basis on which we have the right. And so we were, building a strategy from that place from the beginning, and also as folks I'm sure who are part of these conversations already know, Michigan, it's so strategically positioned from a place of resilience that we were already seeing, companies, for example, choose to locate in Michigan because they're a capital intensive place or a capital intensive company. You may well choose Michigan because yes, everyone will be affected by climate change, but will be relatively less affected by extreme weather and things like that. So we've already kind of seen that motion. But I think more importantly than any of that is the growth in some of our clean energy sectors and what have you. That's been very, very intentional, I hope, like yourself and many, many others for a long time. That has now crested to a place where when we're building our growth strategy, I thought about, the best way to talk to young people across our state and across the country about why they should stay in Michigan, or, why they should consider coming back to our place. And I think there's no better sort of pitch, no better backstory to share or miss the bus than to highlight for folks that if you want to do purpose-driven work, we are the tip of the spear in the fight against the climate crisis. We have the fastest growing clean energy job sector in America, projected to be 160,000 plus jobs.
and real diversity in the kinds of roles you can have, because we're also the second fastest growing tech ecosystem and startup ecosystem in the country. So if you're interested in those kinds of jobs, there isn't a better place to be. So I think telling that story has become a critical part of our work, and it inextricably linked with the project of growth in our society.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, obviously.
Yeah.
And I think it's also that connection to innovation that's so important. And one of the key planks of the work that you did with the Growth Council as well. So those three planks in particular, I think, are so important to talk about at the university because they're so connected to, growing the younger population staying here, that connection to education, and then that innovation component. To me, the universities are a wonderful place to try to lean in and expand that in Michigan.
Yeah. So we did a comparative analysis
Of our faster growing peer states.
with the practice work. So in addition to all our public engagement, advocacy, sponsorship, they left out our place and building a future here. And we checked now 25,000 Michiganders to build that base fact base from which we can build our policy work. We also did this comparative analysis for faster growing peer states to try to identify where to start. Because growth's complex, right? You can imagine starting all kinds of places. And what we identified is exactly what you were just outlining, that our faster growing peer states had three things in common. They tended to have higher, faster growing median incomes. And in order to tackle that, we identified that it was critical here to lean into entrepreneurship and innovation. This place that we're here right now produces more patents than almost any other part of university in the country, for example, except I think maybe we're tied with MIT last year, something like that. And we want to make sure that those companies can be built here and scaled here. I mentioned being the second fastest growing tech ecosystem in the country. We were just talking about Black Tech Saturdays in Detroit now being the preeminent Black Tech ecosystem in the country, arguably the Black and brown founders. So for so many reasons, it matters that we're wrapping arms around supporting those entrepreneurs and grow their companies here. That will be a driver of 90+% of new jobs, so small and medium-sized businesses and startups. The second thing we found is that those faster growing peer states tend to have higher post-secondary attainment than we do right here in our state. And there's a lot of elements of that. You can go all the way back to pre-K and to K-12 achievement as to reasons why that might be the case. But for us, we started by tackling it with some affordability. You've seen in the last year, for example, the governor make it possible for every high school student to get their first year with college credits free, for example, and also pre-K for all 4-year-olds in the state free. And there's much more work to do there, but that was informed by that growth report. And then our third bucket is that we know our places need to be magnets for talent because those faster growing places, it's not that an entire state tends to be faster growing, it's that places in a state tend to drive its growth, if that makes sense. So you can say Texas is growing quickly, but you might mean that Austin is one of the fastest growing places in the country. And so when you look at the amenities that are available in those places, they tend to be walkable, transit-rich, amenity-rich communities. So that means for us to think about housing availability and affordability, the kind of units folks want and need, walkability and investment in placemaking, transit and investment in transit. So that's also a pillar of our goal.
Yeah, I just find it also compelling and I think informative for the work that we're doing at the university and the way that we're working from an economic growth perspective to connect between Ann Arbor and Detroit. So I want to go back to your career path a little bit because I should have asked a couple of questions there, but I jumped into the fun stuff, which is the stuff that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. You've spent some time in the private sector as well as the public sector. Can you talk from your world about how those roles were different and what sort of comparison you see as we're obviously giving insight to students as they're thinking about their own career paths?
Yeah, it's been really interesting in retrospect to have spent time in the nonprofit space and in the private sector, and now a year and a half, 2 years in the public sector. So not at all, but they each really do have their own, for me, benefits. And so maybe it's a sort of personality choice, or maybe we should try to do.
But my takeaway there is that we are really the public sector is so beautiful and powerful because we can do a small thing and it helps incredibly people. So obvious perhaps, but really profoundly important, and to feel the weight of that responsibility when you're in this context. The decisions you make with the $3 of that really matter. And we should take very seriously, for example, the obligation to do, I think, as we did, tons of listening, tons of public engagement and feedback. People should be connected to the government. They should see themselves in the work that they do, I think. And also that we should, take seriously that when we action, so many have the opportunity to actually be affected by it. Hear that you have more speech. And sometimes things go a little bit slower. And there's more consensus building, and there's more sort of, you have to work for your budget. There's things like that. Whereas in the private sector, they're a little more unburdened by some of those elements, and can be a little more agile. So I always thought of it as like an opportunity to pilot things and test things, and be agile in the creation of ideas, bringing different ideas to life. But then the public sector can sometimes identify, see, and help you scale. If there's some on this family that's really working as a solution to one of our problems, let's throw the gas on. So that's what I mean by identifying. I think we really need each other, and should figure out how to seek each other and be in support of one another's work and not in our own silos in order to tackle some of our biggest challenges. I think that's really important.
And with that sort of hindsight, what sort of advice would you have for yourself, either in undergrad or, in your academic career after that? What would you want to make sure that you reinforce for yourself now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess this is sort of a little off topic maybe, but the thing that came to mind for me, honestly, I came to University of Michigan from Monroe County, so Monroe, for anyone watching, very small town in a rural community. And I think when I came to University of Michigan, frankly, it was a little bit of culture shock. I think I felt like this is such a big fancy place. And so I think I walked in with a sense that some of those big jobs were for someone else. I really did think, there were 5 careers you could have, and I could be a doctor, lawyer, teacher, something like that. I think I had a defined sense of what the options were, when the options are obviously very limitless if you're willing to be brave and I think follow what you're very passionate about. I think the sector matters a lot less than doing that and find propelling in some life hours. And there isn't work that's for someone else. It's sort of, moving from your, I wish I had known earlier that I'd be happiest when I was, not chasing somebody else's version of successful, but really doing the thing that got me out of bed in the morning, irrespective of whether that meant that I did this later, quitting my job and raising my own salary and everybody else's in a nonprofit context, or following my passion into the private sector, which at that time I wondered, when you're not housing where you sound like you have all these other people's judgments on you, and none of it needs to matter if you're doing something that authentically feels true to you, and you're solving the problem you want to solve, and it gets you out of bed.
Yeah, I totally agree. No, I think Regina spent a while being a life coach. I'll be honest. It was great. It was really illuminating. And I gotta say, these interviews are so fascinating because so many of the folks who've graciously given of their time, I know pretty well. And yet I have learned so much more about each of them in the course of these conversations. So I think it's great. And I think the students are very interested in it. So this is great. I love doing this. It's so much fun. And I will say, since you gave me an opening, I had an opportunity to speak to, I do a lot of STEM advocacy. I mentor the robotics team at our high school. And so I spoke at a STEM event for women for 9 to 12th graders a few months ago. And I focused on a few things that really resonated. Resonated with your comments. The first is I told them, so it was in Cass City, Michigan. I grew up in the Thumb, you grew up in Monroe. Very different than Ann Arbor, East Lansing, our schools, here in the Big Ten. And I told them, I said, go to campus and figure out how to find your own community. right? There's a lot of different ways to find your own community. My sons and myself all in marching band, like that's a different community. Like just figure out how to make your community on campus. And then the other thing I said that I resonate with your comments about what the governor's done is there are ways to pay for college right now. And so I left it with, please consider college. Like we just really need to get more of our students through institutes of higher education. Like we really, it's one of the core things that we need. And I really appreciate the way your work and the Growth Council has illuminated that, I think in a different way than before. I think it's been really important to shine the light on that. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and I think for me, there's was of course the skills that you get that, something I think folks think about. I use the math a lot more than anyone ever feels like, but there's also just a learning to think and a learning to, meet people who are different than yourselves and change your worldview. And, that stuff is, beyond any cost. You know what I mean? It's and it's incumbent on us to make sure that folks can access that experience. Absolutely. So it's incumbent on us to make sure that it's affordable. It's incumbent on us to make sure there aren't barriers, to make sure that folks don't perceive that it's for someone else. Those are our obligations to ensure that everybody can access the experience.
Totally agree. So back to you. You've had a very varied background. I'm curious of the work that you've done so far. What are you the most proud of? Which accomplishment do you feel like really stands out?
Yeah. I mean, maybe this is recency bias or something, but I do feel like I know I'm a cheeseball, but I do think this has been such an honor, this current role, and getting now thousands and thousands of Michiganders to show up and participate with us was not a good one. I would have not expected to say, let's have a phone call. You know what I mean? I just didn't know if anyone was going to show up. We thought we might have, 3 people or something, but the members of our team are here today, so I feel like can attest to this. We've had full houses in a lot of these instances, truly all over the state, from New Beach to left side, and I'm very conscious that people have limited life hours, lack of responsibility, kids, work. No one had to take the time out of their day to show up and participate. But people love our place. This is an emotional issue for people, which came through very clearly. Folks, care that their children can find a job here, can build a life here. The kids aren't kids can choose the favorite they would like to do that. Young people want to build a future that they're proud of and are willing to tell us what that looks like. So it just was really meaningful that folks are able to contribute in that way. We've done our best to honor their time. And so one of the things I'm really proud of is we've worked hard to try to show toward those insights and the things that you guys can carry to results and a lot faster than what thought. Work is like turning a barge, you start to see that a year after, it's hard work to do, and the only thing is going to get you a project and take everybody. So we're already seeing really good time. Actually, University of Virginia put out a study recently. This is in January, so breaking news really, of all 50 states, and they show that Michigan's young adult population is accelerating faster than 45 other states. We're in the top 5. So that isn't the case yet.
Congratulations.
It isn't the case yet that we have more total young people, right? And one started to turn orange, right? You can't have one person or one office that is really private. That's those thousands of people who took their time to follow along and support and show up and investments.
That's easy. So you've had a lot of insight into Michiganders over the last couple of years. And I've learned a bunch from you listening to you talk about is that not working? Let's make sure. Okay, thank you. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
We definitely want to make sure that we can hear. You have had a lot of insight into Michiganders over the last couple of years. And I've learned a lot from you just in the brief conversations that we've had about some of the surprises in that data. I was wondering if you could just talk about that a little bit, because we'd love to understand, what have you learned?
I turn myself off.
It's green.
Okay. that's its push. So you never. I think we're okay. My students
Internet is
want
yelling at
this.
her.
Keep going. Thank you. Anywho, what are some surprises?
In that data.
Yeah, there's so much. So let's see. Maybe this is a surprise to no one, but I think it's always important to know. Among the books across our state, the top response that we received in most parts of our state, to what they're looking for, we think we could, invest in transit. Walk to the transit, and so I talk about it everywhere I go to honor that. In Michigan and in our nationwide survey, and we did a big survey. When you do a nationwide survey, we did 16,000 people, we did 6,000 people in cities across the country growing at 1834. Folks let us know the most motivating factor for them when they were choosing a place to call home would be access to housing and access to the ability to someday own a home. And I think that is important to underscore because not everybody wants to own a home, but the fact that that's still of critical importance for a lot of folks and a really motivating, compelling thing is important for us to think about here in our state. Michigan is home prices are 40%-ish of the national average, national home price on average, but we're also rent burdened here in our state, so that doesn't
And not much stock.
So we're working hard at that. There's a goal to get 115,000 new units online. We need to build the kind of units folks want in the places that they want them, all of that. But we're also investing in down payment programs, things like that, to make it more accessible for folks. A couple more contexts. If in that same national survey, if you account for just parents, so families. The most motivating factor for them in a new place to call home would be access to free or affordable childcare or pre-K. Most motivating because for a lot of those folks, childcare is, and I know this personally, more expensive than your rent. And so being able to access that is critically important. We obviously, like I mentioned, have pre-K for all 4-year-olds that's free and available. But that's just the beginning, childcare and elder care came up as a top challenge across our state from our own in-state respondents as well. So those I thought were really interesting. And then in terms of who stays and who goes, I think it's important to note that, even though Michigan is not bad at retention relative to our neighbors, so you might wonder, is it a retention problem? Is it an attraction problem? We're not worse at retention than our neighboring states. There are some troubling trends that we want to reverse. The more highly educated you are, the more likely you are to go. And if you're a highly educated person of color, you're more likely to go, much more likely. And when you look at what's going, you can see very clear patterns. Our highly educated folks of color, especially in this region, in Southeast Michigan, we're going to go to Atlanta, to Houston. So it helps to point out what are those places offering, and we can ask in these long form conversations. And you hear things like transit and housing and culture and what have you. So it provides roadmaps for us when we're thinking about our growth strategy. For example, I could go on and on. The last thing I suppose I'll say is the reason for so long in Michigan that we've talked about talent retention and attraction, even though our retention is worse particularly than others, is because our attraction is. So you need a replacement effect. It's not bad for young people to go try New York. I did. I'm a boomerang. To go try LA, go sow your wild oats in Paris for a second. I don't know what it is. But that happens, right? But you also want folks waking up in Nashville to say, I'm going to try Detroit. I'm going to try, whatever that might be for you. And absent that, you have to retain everyone, in order to not go in the wrong direction. And so not only are those folks who are going to New York, hopefully like me, going to boomerang back, that's what we'd like, because we have 60, 70, 80,000 open jobs right now that we'd love for them to fill in fast growing industries. But also, we want to make sure we're attracting folks from across the country to come and join us, to be part of, what we're building here in Michigan and that attraction part's really.
So you talked a little bit in a conversation that we had ahead of time about a visit you did to Houston, but listening to you, it makes me think, what can we do to talk about Michigan differently nationally?
Mhm.
And I was curious, obviously you think about it from your office perspective, but I'm also curious, what do you think about for the average Michigander?
Yeah, well, I think we all learn the important role to play in this, for what it's worth, in the shifting perception. One thing that I like to say to folks, on this point, is that I would never ask someone to only be, like a positive commercial. And, that isn't all I'd ask, because if you love a place, and you're willing to talk about it and stand for it, and anyone says anything bad about it, you're gonna hear from me. You know what I mean? All of that. You also tend to love a place enough to name the things that you want to be better about it. Both those things can be true. They are not, incongruent. Like, I am a walking, love Michigan, and truly may or may not have, gotten in a big fight on a DC subway once about how great it is to be Detroit is, but we don't have to talk about that today. Anywho, but at the same time, I love it enough that I want us to make sure that we're investing in, transit, that we're investing in great opportunities, access to great education, all of that. And so when we talk to Michiganders about being great ambassadors for our state, I just think it's important to note that, because we also want to hear all the things that you want and need so that we can act on them. Otherwise, we can't make our place a better and better place to call home. And I think about that policy work as product work, right? We're investing in our place and making Michigan a better and better, product for all of us to live in and be in and celebrate. And that will make the marketing easier and easier, right? But in the meantime, it's already a great place to be for so many people, ourselves and many others, and they don't know about it. So my guidance to folks when you are celebrating Michigan is that the myths to bust are that folks still think Michigan is, I say we have an old and cold problem. They think of Michigan as a little old fashioned, and that, they imagine our jobs are only in one sector and maybe only old fashioned manufacturing. We have manufacturing now that looks like a bunch of people on laptops. We have people making solar panels and wind turbines and,
Oh
doing
my God, I went to the Marshall battery plant.
amazing.
The whole thing is a clean room. Like, it's nuts.
Totally.
Oh my gosh.
But I
So true.
in addition to that, there's incredible diversity of jobs, all these tech jobs, like I was mentioning. I could go on and on and on. If people don't know about the incredible history of creativity and innovation in our place, art, what have you. So you can tell those stories, and bust those myths for us. And also, I think it's wild that so few folks realize the incredible natural resources that we have here and how beautiful they are. If you get a chance to explain to folks that, you can't see across these lakes, and that we have all these beaches. I know it's so basic for us, but folks don't identify the Great Lakes on a map in most parts of our country. So it's really important for us, I think, to highlight that this place is innovative, creative, and truly awe-inspiring in its natural beauty. I think that busts the myths that we need to bust about our place.
Yeah, I think that's really true. How much do you get involved in business retention, and what sort of role does an office like yours play in those conversations?
Yeah, offices across, for example, can see that are a direct relationship with our businesses doing business retention, and the group office is less so. We're sort of working more at like a systems level, but we're definitely tracking, who is kind of moving in and out and for which reasons, for example, at a systems level. On the, for example, climate side of things, last year we partnered with another university to not be named, so maybe next year we'll do this one. And we have a nationwide business survey, asking business leaders, for example, if they've been impacted by climate, and what if they're taking action in that regard, what investments they're making. And we found that 75% of them are considering relocation as a result of climate impacts they're already experiencing. So that's a way, for example, that we're tracking, both retention, but also potential attraction and relocation.
And then is there any follow-up to a study like that, or tangible action? I mean, I know it helps in the conversations that happen between MEDC and business leaders,
Yeah.
as well as across the government, but are there any other follow-ups to that?
Yeah. I mean, we are putting it to work in a lot of ways. I think one of the distinct follow-ups is that what we identified there, the sort of top things folks were looking for when they were considering relocation, in addition to natural resources and things like that. The top thing was actually partnership with a state that could support them in their transition to
clean energy and through some of these, navigating their way through some of these challenges. So that gives us a call to action as a state, of sort of things that we need to do. What do we already have available? What resources? What don't we? Where do we need partners to come to the table to help create some of these resources to support these businesses that are the ones raising their hands saying they want to participate actively in, moving forward. Because I didn't share this, but it was a wild finding that 100% of the businesses that responded said they were already experiencing the impacts in some way of climate, whether that was from disruption, power disruptions or disruptions in their supply chain or utility cost increases. The list goes on. But all to say, 100% were experiencing it. Fewer than that, but many said they wanted to take action, and the number one thing they needed was partnership. So it really gave us a call to action to start building resources.
Yeah, and then the other issue for us as Michiganders becomes that continuity piece, right? So of course, we're in the middle of a strange federal time, and then we're coming up on another election cycle quickly, right? And so how do you build that continuity within the state? Obviously not only on the political side, but it does manifest itself in the trade associations, the business organizations, universities, things like that, in order to create that continuity for those companies to want to be here.
Absolutely. I don't know if this is a popular opinion or not, but I really do think that I talked about this a lot. But I do think the local work that we are doing is a really important component to that continuity. I really think that, doing so much public engagement and sitting with folks and really, doing a lot of listening means that you're building, and we did this in all kinds of really diverse counties across the state. And there's tons of agreement. There's tons of agreement about these problems, tons of agreement about how the solution should be. And if you really build a lot of consensus that way, irrespective of who happens to be representing that constituency in a given moment, their constituency is consistent. And so I think, there's no shortcut to doing that hard on the ground work, but if you are consistent and you do it, I think it can provide a North Star as to who we are and what we believe in, and, belief in some of these industry sectors that are, producing jobs and results and economic growth for communities. And you know what I mean? I think you get continuity there, which certainly isn't the answer to everything, but I think isn't an answer to some of these challenges.
Yeah, I've always thought there's more that we agree on. I know that feels trite to say, but it's really true when you talk to people across the state. So, okay, well, I know there's gonna be lots of good questions in the room for you, and so I want to move to those. But first, I'm going to give you the lightning round just because it's fun and everybody's done it so far. So, okay, favorite place.
I'm lucky enough to live in my favorite place.
Ever since I was younger, wanted to get back to Detroit. I now live in the city, and I live in a neighborhood called Liesl Village. I've been walk around and visit. I was crazy enough to buy a 100-year-old house and renovate it, and then I did it again. And we bought it and renovated it. So all to say, I'm wandering around.
Yeah, there's a great home tour for Indian Village.
Yes,
that I've
tour.
gone to.
Go out and people to come hang out with us.
That's a good one. Okay, first job.
My first job, I was a lifeguard at the Monroe County YMCA. Shout out again to Monroe, twice in one time.
I like Monroe.
Yeah, quickly followed by a waitressing job at Lone Star Steakhouse. So yeah, I've done it all.
I like it. Recent book or podcast that you want all of us to listen to or read?
I just went on spring break with the family, and what did I read? I read They Dreamed of Empires, or We Dreamed of Empires. It's a funny, satirical rewriting of history about Cortez and Montezuma, that whole sort of interaction, and they sort of rewrite what happened in a way that's maybe more positive.
All right, we'll check it out. That might be a question just for me. Okay, what never fails to make you laugh?
Well, my team's gonna laugh, but I'm deep into Detroit Pistons content. So if anyone hasn't jumped on that bandwagon, go ahead and get on it. And their admin on their social channels is just killing the game. So hilarious social on great basketball content.
Great. Another good thing to check out. Okay, what kind of questions do we have in the room? Greg's the first.
I want to just thank you for the remarks and your enthusiasm about Michigan. Michigator myself. 7 years here. After 4 months on a farm in Pennsylvania, PhD. I came back. Lots of questions. Really appreciate again just how your energy is going towards growth. I do a lot of work analyzing the auto industry in terms of sustainability and the transition. We need to move from internal combustion to EVs, and Detroit is really an opportunity to, be leaders in electrification. But we are facing a challenging time with the federal administration. And China is really, they're this. And just wondering, how do you approach this? I know the governor was in but it's so vital that we continue to support this growth. We have an EV center here at the University of Michigan that the state has supported, which is great. But is there anything you could offer in terms of how business navigates this, how researchers navigate this? Workers, even our workers have mixed views of electrification.
Sure.
How do you message?
Yeah, obviously we can talk about that by itself for days.
I don't know if I should repeat the question.
Yeah, probably.
So the question was about, electric vehicles and
Our state have an opportunity to be a leader in that area, but of course this is a challenging time, and what can we do to navigate it? You're great, sorry. So I'll just say we could talk about that topic by itself for days, and there's a version of it that we could go down about what some of the companies themselves are doing as they diversify, of course, into electric, but also hybrid and other things in order to keep going on some of that innovation. But from my perspective, where I'm sitting, some of the things that I think are really important for us to make sure we don't lose ground on include, for example, in these coming years, of course, I'm going to say talent. But the reason that I think that's so important is because it's one, an area where we have such a strategic advantage right now. You all may know this already, but Michigan produces 4 times the number of engineers of any other state. We have real distinctive competency in this area, and a real growth, not just in our biggest companies, but in some of our startups that are driving innovation in the EV sector, but also in sectors and supply chain areas and things like that all around that conversation. And in softer economic times, I graduated from college in 2008, so I remember this well, these softer economic times. There were tough moments in Michigan's recent past. In the 2010s, we had moments where we were losing 100,000 people a year. We're now have been in 2 censuses where we've seen positive growth, so go team. But in tough years now, we're lose 5,000. You know what I mean? So we're in a really different place than we were then, and you can't land there again. You can't land there again and lead the clean energy transition. You can't land there again and do the electric vehicle transition. You know what I mean? We have to be in a place where, arguably, I think our best asset is our people. Are the incredible talent and workforce, the incredible talent being graduating from our universities, our one capacity. You know what I mean? I just think that we need to do what it takes to make sure we're retaining those folks, even during perhaps a tough time. So for what it's worth, maybe this is a little off topic, but I didn't mention it. We, in our office, piloted a program in the fall and just launched round 2 of a program called Make My Home that's intended to do just this. What it allows is for any community across our state to apply and let us know who they need to retain or attract. It could be as specific as a community in the UP saying we need nurses or teachers, or as general as the city of Detroit saying we want to keep our engineers or our tech workers or our startup founders, or attract them from across the country. And let us know which incentive or program benefit they want to try to help.
That could be student loan forgiveness. It could be down payment on home or housing stipend support. And we're piloting those initiatives across the state. Again, to help folks in this moment, who might otherwise not be able to make the choices that we hope that they're able to make that are so critically important. So that's one portion of the conversation. But there's maybe directly, related to these only, but I think an important one.
Really appreciate, I didn't know this.
Yeah.
4 times the number of engineers in the state. So I co-founded a program called Engineering Sustainable Systems here at the University of Michigan, which is dual degree with our college.
Mm-hmm.
This is great.
Yeah.
It's just
important.
amazing.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Got a lot of other questions, but I'll let.
Yeah. Sorry.
Sort of taking the flip side of the first question. I heard a lot of talk today, which is really clear about cutting edge, leading edge ideas. A lot of the work that I've been doing recent months has been touching food systems, baseline industries and sectors that I think are really going to be impacted by climate change. What does the state be thinking about in terms of how to incentivize practices that prepare our food systems for climate change, how to incentivize food systems? Can you speak a little bit about how
Yeah, that's really interesting. And of course, we talk about, for example, Michigan first agriculture, things like that. It's one of the really,
Second most diverse agriculture in this country.
right. We're
Only to
fun fact
California.
today. Yeah. That's one of the things that we of course talk about that as part of the conversation about growth. One of the assets that we have, why it's critically important that we, make sure we're supporting those industries here in our state. And I think it's important to the broader climate conversation when we're having it, and we talk about the kinds of jobs available to folks in Michigan and why we're a leader in climate. That's one of the industries that we talk about because of the availability of food and how we think about food in this new context. But I think that your question is really well taken because it's an interesting one. What could or should the state be doing, that's sort of on the bleeding edge equivalent, but for this area, I think that's really interesting. Our colleagues in the Office of Rural Prosperity or MDARD, for example, I know do some work in this area, and not to put my colleague on the spot, but I know that that Julia coordinates with them a little bit, and I'd be so curious to ask them that question as well. So maybe we should follow up with them and let you know. But I think it's a good one. I think it's a really good question. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a conference going on just today and tomorrow, I
Yeah.
think, on this exact topic.
Yeah.
So, Yep. Charlene?
Thank you so much for your remarks, really interesting. And love your enthusiasm as well. I have a very simple question and a complex question.
Okay, let's.
Can you get it? What is the sample for that survey you did of businesses? Said in that.
I can get you a copy, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the second one is, when you, in your listing work, find out that affordable housing stock is so critical and transit are so critical. And these are big things that need to change. And probably outside the purview of your office.
What is?
What do you do in response to that? How do you work on housing stock?
I can take it. So the question was, when we get insights from big things like transit or housing, what do we do? Like, how can we change in those areas? So I sort of jokingly said, what is that of purview? Because growth is so wide ranging, truly, and one of our 3 pillars around, making our communities magnets for talent, I think is inextricably linked with some of these big system change, things like transit and housing. So what we've done so far is, we've gone to the legislature. So, for example, last year we were lucky enough to be asked to present and testify in Senator McMorrow's committee a fair number of times, speaking to how, in addition to other things, transit and housing are economic development. That the placemaking is critical to talent retention, and talent is critical to economic growth. And we've seen the conversation around economic development continue to evolve in our state, as I could say as a result, who knows, but directly out of that committee. That includes, for example, conversation about our economic development tools, including investments in food saving, investments in transit. So, it is not the case that our tiny office or our tiny budget can implement transit. It's not the case that we build housing. We don't. Michigan does. But it is incumbent on us to make sure that what we're learning is available to our departmental partners. So we have meetings with the heads of other departments across the state to share our growth insights. We of course publish our reports, but also I did 90+ events last year across the state sharing the findings. And we do our best to make sure the legislature is aware of everything that we're learning so that they can take legislative action.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Great.
The project, state, draft, strategy.
Oh, cool.
And we're partnering, Center for Sustainable Systems is partnering with Naval Architecture and Marine Engineering on that. And I think one of the opportunities is to highlight the blue-green economy in Michigan. And I'm advocating that we connect it with Pure Michigan. So I'm really interested in how we, advice you might have on how we could go ahead with this. And it addresses also issues that you've talked about in terms of growth versus conservation. But I see huge opportunities there. We were talking about electrifying wreck boating and also creating manufacturing. Fishing, also ferries, just really being leaders. And it's going to take a lot to lift us, but we have so many. It's a huge industry in the state.
Because of our positioning, questions about maritime sort of maritime industry. I had a chance last year to this is a silly example maybe, but it was such a good learning experience for me. To meet the folks from LilyPad, if you know that. And they took me on a ride. I got to go around on the LilyPad boat a little bit and talk about their supply chain and manufacturing and all of that. That was a good time. And then also to chat with folks in Traverse City about their Blue Tech Innovation Center up there and what have you. And again, think a little bit about what we have available as distinctive competencies here and that connection between our natural resources, our strategic innovation and R&D capacity here, and our ability to make things. That's one of the things that we do talk about a lot, that Michigan's unique in that you can both invent and manufacture, the future here. There aren't a lot of places where you can do both those things. I love the Venn diagram, and it's nice to be at the center of that one, right? And so in this area, I think that's a very strategic, right, in future investment for Michigan, because you can do the invention, some of the manufacturing, and also we're in a strategic location for that. And I remember folks having a conversation last year as well about inventing a new green, naval boat, just all kinds of big things around this topic. So as that continues to progress, I'd love to be helpful any way we can as y'all are thinking about the messaging and all of that. I think it's a really important project. Yeah. Yeah.
Really? Sure.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, cool. Yeah. 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 It's the questions about shaping culture. I think it's in a critical part of the project, of any project, of policy work. Some folks I think skip steps, right? And we can't skip steps. That's a really important part of it. I know I've mentioned our public engagement work before, but just to hone in on it for a second, get more specific about what we're doing. We literally brought folks together and then sat down to, a big circle and said, hey, we're in this room for an hour. You know what I mean? That's in like a listening session. The reason I'm being as specific as that is because for some of this work, I think there needs to be space for folks to just share, what they're thinking. And it didn't always feel collaborative. Sometimes folks would share things that I share this example a lot, but one of the first conversations we had like that, someone said, you can grow Michigan, but don't grow it here. As chief growth officer, you think, oh, we're not going to have a fun conversation. You know what I mean? But it ended up being a great conversation. You have to just once we got past that place, everybody got to talk about, the follow-up to that, I think, was something like, great, like, tell me more about why you feel that way. What does growth mean for you? And we got to a place where, if growth means that my kids and grandkids can find a job here, if growth means that we have, enough folks to drive our ambulances and EMTs, and you know what I mean? If we have folks to doctors, then I'm about growth. And it doesn't have to look the same in every community. I'm imagining skyscrapers, you know what I mean? Then we got to a really beautiful place by the end. This might sound like I'm a roundabout answer to your question, but I guess I think the thing I struggle with is how do you scale that experience? Because I think that experience for me has been a powerful one. And getting the chance to do that all over the state in the last year and a half, I wouldn't trade it. It's been a really, really powerful one to get to be in relationship with folks like that. And by the end, walk out really aligned, actually, with folks who I didn't walk in aligned with. And I think it is culture shifting and culture shaping. We get to talk about things that folks might be opposed to in a knee-jerk way at the beginning, but not by the time we leave. But again, the question is, how do you scale that kind of interaction enough that you're actually shifting culture and not just, a room, So we're doing other things too. I mentioned earlier, we're starting a field trip program where we get folks on a bus together and take them to different parts of the state to experience different things they haven't experienced yet. That was really beautiful. So I could go on and on, but I think you're asking the right question, because otherwise everything is a flash in the pan. You can pass a piece of legislation that immediately gets reversed or flip-flop, you know what I mean, a moment later. In order for us to make consistent progress, and you were talking about consistency, I think everybody has to walk together. We have to bring everybody along. And so I think that hard work is really important work.
All right, I'm going to take moderator's prerogative and ask the last question. You know the university well, our incredible student body, our faculty and researchers, and what we do both at the university as well, or at the state as well as at the global scale. Thinking forward, what do you wish the university would lean into?
The first thing I think was yourself. Why don't I go there?
Sure. I didn't prep the question, so you can do whatever you want.
There's so many amazing things the university is doing. So
I'll say that, but my selfish answer. We were just talking about the cool work that's happening in Detroit that the university is investing in. Because I can friends everywhere we go. My instinct is even connecting better Ann Arbor and Detroit would just be a remarkable achievement.
I don't think that's selfish.
Well, a little bit because we have so many wonderful students from across the country that come to join us here in Ann Arbor. This is such a magnet for talent. We want more of them to stay. And as long as we're, graduating lots of folks who haven't yet experienced our whole region and our big cities and our great things that we have to offer, I don't have our office doesn't have as much of a right to retain them, right? So I think for the benefit of our whole state, I'm being silly about being selfish, but for the benefit of our whole state, anything we can do to help those folks get more connected to our region, I think is such a benefit to all of us. So any way I can help with that, I would love to.
I love that. I was in a meeting with faculty not too long ago where they said that they want money for buses so that they can bus students around the state, but in particular to Detroit.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of people thinking along those lines. So I'm so grateful for your time. Thank you so much for making this trip. Really appreciate you being willing to do this. So let's thank Hilary for her time with us. Thanks for joining us. People that have been participating in the past, you'll get an email about what we do in the fall. So your opinion matters. I hope you learned that in the last hour, and that will continue. So thanks again.
Oh, yeah, I'm going. Yeah, that's exciting. Oh, fun. I'll see you there. Amazing.
We're taking a busload of students, it'll be
Oh,
great.
are you?
Yes.
Good to
Thank you
see
very
you.
much.
Yes,
Appreciate it.
yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
So I hear we found about everything
Well,
doing well marine work.
love
It's
this.
really interesting.
This program, I didn't know we.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Oh, sure, like photos, sorry. I gotta get the speakers photos
Oh,
done.
reach out.
Oh, we will.